Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande.
The man goes through first, expression still unchanging while the gate is open.
Her expression, too, changes considerably once the gate is down. Why 3?
I don't know if it was the right thing to do. I realized, mostly from meeting you, only a little from hell, that I am not holding myself together well enough. More balanced stats for a time might help. Planning for next round of augmentations to be slower. More constitution than 19 may not be dispensable. Strength and dexterity may mean things. Would need to take risk and visit City of Brass anyways. You might have a plan that only works with hell-interpreted wishes. If the wish resource method fails, we have 3 wishes for the last step of the current plan, even if the pit fiends might pitch a fit about keeping the deal. It costs extra time at INT 27 instead of INT 29, and maybe that difference will ruin everything, but sometimes you throw out the calculation and go with your intuition. It's just important to understand the calculation first.
Yeah, all right. I failed to explain all my reasoning here, which is on me. And they're not in the secret area, so she can't explain it now either. That aside, I think enhancing yourself more evenly and more slowly sounds like a good plan, and I'm glad you agree that you're not holding yourself together well. No offense.
I apologize for the sudden surprise. It came to me at the last minute. I'd have spoken earlier if I'd thrown away my calculation earlier.
She starts heading towards the more secret base sectors so that she can ask the rest of her questions. Shall we, now that nothing's time-sensitive on the scale of hours, take some time off and then reconvene? Do you have a summary I can read of your plans and reasoning relevant to them?
Taking time off sounds like a good idea. And no, I wasn't, expecting you to come back to me before the primary plot had reached a climax. Other people here for harm reduction, or even assistance, were not ones I considered worth arguing with about the core plans. They passed through the inner forbiddance, then the core forbiddance, continuing to head to the demiplane.
I find it kind of terrifying and infuriating that you haven't argued the core plans with people, but I guess I will work on getting into a state to argue about them without just sniping at you. I feel like if I were even considering doing something like this, I'd have argued the core plans with a couple hundred people before deciding on it.
I'm not saying this well, and mostly wrong thought. I was speaking, angrily at myself. I argued with a lot of people about individual details, and everybody wanted to argue different details to the point where there was no unified explanation I could save time by writing. In my defense, the actual macro-strategic calculation is not something where Golarian natives think in that format. I think my emotions are actually coming back online through all of the damage at Splendor 25 instead of Splendor 20, and it's incredibly superheated odd that Dathalani are wired in a way where Splendor 20 wouldn't be enough.
Are you sure that's a Dathalani thing and not a you thing? Not worth it. I wonder if there's a way to get Peranza and Asmodia. Just so there's people around who you taught and who speak your language and who, didn't wrong you like I did.
Keltham V3, back online, Irwayne? Ione Sala has been filling some of that role, though she doesn't try to talk me into or out of anything. I'm also worried that if Asmodia was around, I'd be moved by her in an uncalculating way, and then that's one more person where Pharasma can look through me to Asmodia. I'll think about it. Through the portal and into the time-dilated demiplane, murmuring green glowing glitter as he enters. The forbiddance edge is marked with green paint on the ground. Nobody has put up an illusory curtain across it as yet. Everybody out, unless you want to quickly make the case that your work is time-sensitive and near a critical path, he says loudly enough for it to fill the small demiplane.
People take one look at Mr. Doomlord in Intense Lady's company and quickly get out of the demiplane.
Do you need anything from me before we take a break?
I don't think so. Random in case you end up trying to do mental planning, we already have unlimited diamond dust for permanencies given somebody to cast it. I don't think I mentioned that, and I'm obviously not going to complain if you want to spend 100,000 gold pieces on anything at all. Important.
Where are you getting your money? I know Cheliax was stalling.
Early on, by accepting fees from evil entities attending lectures, or wanting to use my knowledge without getting me angry about patent gratuities. Buying headbands and spell silver from Cheliax, which they're obliged to sell me up to a fractional limit of production, and which they can't price too high because that affects the accounting on what they have to pay me later over internal production. reselling some of those goods to evil entities. Taking out some relatively small, ultra-high interest loans backed by my share of Project Lawful from evil entities like the Church of Norgerber. Somewhat more recently, I decided I hadn't been taking things seriously enough and was repeating the mistake I'd made in Cheliax when I hadn't asked for serious resources earlier. Given the diamond synthesis trick and how far I'd come in establishing lawful evil purchasing lines and my own lair, I was very likely going to be able to do something. I was going to try to do it before the probable deadline on Cheliax attacking Osirion. I decided that my having more time to think things through would constitute harm reduction, even from the extrapolated, fully informed perspective of people who disagreed with me. So I took out high-interest loans from Isfahel, backed by the prospective income from Cheliax, started buying from the Kalesh Empire, and paid the Grand High Priestess of Sarenrai to put up the temporary time-accelerated demiplane. Galarian is not so primitive that it has no large financial entities to propagate probable future income backwards in time.
Okay, I'm going to try to figure out how I think morality should work, and what kind of person I am, and assuming I don't end up deciding I just want you to have an emotional breakdown, I'll let you know in a couple hours when I'm ready to talk.
Right. Well, my plan is to go have an emotional breakdown and rely on Splendor 25 to just make it through on sheer force of will, spend long enough like that to go to sleep that way, and hope when I wake up that I'm in a state that's stable at Splendor 23 so I can swap to the +4+0+4 headband. I am actually kind of scared to augment intelligence or wisdom again, or go underneath Splendor 25, but that is something I can think about later. Any harm reduction comments on that?
I do notice that you're having way more problems with identity consistency than most people I know of who wear headbands or get cursed into losing half their intelligence or whatever. Some of that might be Dath Ilani techniques, which make the stat boosts affect more aspects of your thinking, but some of it might be that you're changing how your brain works all the time. If I were you, I'd try changing my mind around less. I'm not you, though. Osirion knocked me down to INT9 and I was still me, just me who couldn't quite remember why I was doing what I was doing.
The angry, scathing remark that comes to mind, such as does sometimes come to mind about Galarian, and I am not sure that it's false, is that people here do not use their mental ability stats for much, do not have skills that deeply matter and scale to use more of those ability stats. I checked around to see if Galarian knew anything collectively about side effects of rapidly changing around ability stats to handle particular problems, and Galarian's collective wisdom seemed to be that people were usually just the same if you added +6 intelligence points, only smarter. Which was such an absolutely alien concept that, again, the scathing remark that came to mind was that Galarion did not have any experience relevant for grown-ups, only for primitive, untrained children who only use their mental ability stats for stereotypically ability stat-laden work problems. I am again not sure this scathing remark is wrong. An alternative hypothesis is that Dath Ilani are configured to be more internally consistent in general and tolerate less variance. People in Galarian seem to vary much more in personality from day to day, even when not swapping augmentations, than I am used to. Much more visibly so, now that I'm out of Project Lawful and not around people putting up consistent Chelish fronts. It would have been a dead giveaway to anyone not from Cheliax or, unfortunately, Dath Ilan.
I think Dath Ilan breaks something in people, but I would think that, and probably we shouldn't argue it until we've both had time to think.
It is common wisdom everywhere that is not Cheliax, that Cheliax breaks everything about people, and I did not think to recruit in advance anybody who could help you with that. Maybe don't set your own new personality in concrete before you've talked with our Iomedayan wizard, possibly. Fianar of Osirion, the one who is reading over your hell contract, is closer to being able to keep up with you in a conversation intelligence-wise. But I have absolutely no idea if the two of you would get along.
It might be awkward how my current theory of what to do from here involves letting Cheliax invade Osirion. I'll talk to the Iomedan. She seems like a kind of good that I might not hate with a passion. Especially if the reason Iomade is not with Caden Kylian is not being okay with the risk of ending the world.
There's a new adventurer's tent set up in the demiplane. This one is presumably for Carissa Seaver. Somebody left a plate of chocolates outside the tent's entrance by way of welcome.
She's not really in the mood for chocolates. She's in the mood to collapse dramatically on the floor and wonder if she should, in fact, have immediately betrayed Keltam to Odelmans who would crush him. This is not an important question to answer, in one sense. She can't do it now. The error, if it was an error, was made due to intense time pressure and incomplete information about her past self's plans and panic, and the risk of being mind-read and love for Keltham, and guilt over having harmed him so badly, and existential horror at the thought of him being casually annihilated for a thought he might not even in fact be thinking, and she doesn't exactly think she'll make similar errors in the future. She's sure never, ever, ever going to love anyone again. The obvious analysis here is that yes, she should have immediately betrayed Keltham, or at least have refused to step out of the dome until she had his promise she could oppose him if she saw fit, which he wouldn't have given, at which point she'd have betrayed him to Odelman's. Why does it even come to her to betray him to Odelman's? How is Odelman's not carefully watching the situation already? Wasn't Broom supposed to be handling this? Broom, who Osirian freed because they don't enslave halflings. It would serve everyone right, in some sense. Certainly serve Otolmans and Cheliax right, if Broom, freed, decided to go travel the world or buy a house or something. Or maybe he's here and just hoping he won't have to stab Keltham. Either way, if Keltham isn't worrying about Broom, Carissa won't bring the possibility to his attention. The less obvious analysis here is that this way she might be able to talk Keltham into a version of his plan that is actually better than the status quo, and it all depends on the probabilities, which she's poorly equipped to even begin to estimate. But Snack Service thought something good could happen here, something for which Carissa mattered and Carissa's status in hell mattered. And she thinks everything Caden Nethys has done has made this harder for Keltham to pull off. Odelman's picking Broom in the first place was a response to Pilar and Ione being picked. She's paying the situation closer attention. Nefreti said that the deception would have gone on longer without Kaiden/Nethys's interventions, and if that's so, then when Keltham departed, he'd have been richer, and Cheliax been less impaired in pursuing him, and he wouldn't have had the prospect of his children rushing him to solve this prematurely. They'd already have existed. If Caden and Nethys were aiming at the destruction of the world, they could have probably done it, from this starting point. So they're aiming at something else. And she's not sure this logic is valid, but it does feel like probably if she were the kind of person who Nethys knew would instantly report Keltham, then some other person meets Keltham where he lands instead, some person who doesn't feel so strongly about the world not ending. This is, perhaps, a question to return to when she's a god. If she's a god. She sure is making a lot of plans premised on her godhood, lately, for someone who does not in fact possess godhood, and is actually just a fifth circle wizard with more money than fifth circle wizards usually have. Perhaps she is staring at this because for all that it hurts, it doesn't hurt as much as staring inward and figuring out who she is and what she isn't and what she's done. About half an hour later, she concedes that she should eat the chocolates and sends for the Iomedan wizard. Do people go to hell for practicing acid splash on their classmates?
That's a good question. Trials are secret, of course, but we don't think so, not directly.
As what I thought. It's not about damning you. It's about you believing that you are, fundamentally, the kind of person who'd do that everyone is the kind of person who'd do that, about drawing that outline around the muddle in a way that is the shape of a damned person. If Pharasma couldn't see anything you did before age 20 at all, they wouldn't do it any differently. Some people find it upsetting, though. I didn't.
You do not strike me as a person with particularly high empathy or instinctive aversion to hurting people. I don't know if that's innate, people do vary in that innately, or learned.
Probably learned. I'm a very quick study. 3 days ago, I spent 6 hours torturing a man nearly to death for fun and to impress a girl I liked.
Is there something we can do now to get him into a safe situation?
Oh, I don't think so. The girl thought he'd recover. I did not ask what definition of recover she was using. He's not being hurt now, and I'm going to have to be very careful operating in Cheliax from here on out. Do you, every time you hear about a bad thing, stop to think how to fix it?
I think it's important when thinking about bad things to keep almost all of your attention on where the badness is located. And the badness about having tortured a man for 6 hours is located in him, first and most, that he suffered and is suffering, and meaningfully coming to terms with it is something that usually ought to start with him. You can fix your own flaws through introspection. You can't fix having tortured people by looking inside yourself.
He did, sincerely attempt to have my family maledicted to Abaddon because I said something mean to him at a party. I don't actually have the slightest idea what the Iomedan answer is there.
Did torturing him save your family in some way?
No, it's just why I picked him.
Well, torturing people is bad, and having people's families maledicted to Abaddon is also bad, and deciding to hurt people who do bad things to deter other bad things is an approach to problem solving which humans have a tendency to err at in many different directions. So it's best done systematically and transparently as part of a just institution. And if you find yourself just wanting to hurt a bad person in a way that doesn't make anything better, you shouldn't. Why did you bring it up if we can't help him now?
I don't want to just go, well, I did all those bad things. I can't fix them now. I won't do it again. I guess I'm done here. It doesn't feel like enough.
What would feel like enough?
Burning eternally in the fires of hell?
Eternally. You don't think after a couple of years you'd go, wow, actually, I think that was enough?
Depends whether Keltham ends up destroying the universe because I fucked him up so badly. Burning eternally in the fires of hell really wouldn't be enough for that.
So comparing the worlds where Keltham destroys the universe except you and your loved ones, and you and your loved ones have a nice eternity somewhere, and the world where Keltham destroys the universe except you and your loved ones, and you burn in hell forever, and your loved ones have a nice eternity somewhere, what seems better to you?
I don't have loved ones.
Okay, I only specified that because I think most people wouldn't want to spend eternity completely alone, burning on fire or not.
I mean, I could make constructs or something. I'm sorry. I think I'm being a bad student here and not addressing the point you wanted addressed. It is better if I am on fire because everything is my fault and I can't live with that. And if I'm on fire, then I don't have to.
I think that probably you just need to toughen up and deal with things being your fault and stop trying to avoid living with that.
That is somehow not exactly the answer I expected. It's kind of what Darina would say if I said that to her, but I don't think she's good.
What answer were you expecting?
I don't know. Something about how people shouldn't suffer?
People can suffer if they want to. It's just in your specific case it seems like you want to because the alternative is learning how to live with yourself.
I do actually also separately like it when people hurt me, but for my own benefit and it makes me stronger, and then they pet me and tell me how well I did. That's a separate thing here that's not just about learning how to live with myself.
Is it by any chance the case that that's approximately the only context in which anyone in Cheliax has ever been nice to you?
Well, if they were just nice unprovoked, it'd be weird, and I wouldn't be sure what they were playing at.
So teaching someone to associate suffering and slavery with companionship, support, and intimacy, which are otherwise completely inaccessible and pathetic to want, is actually much more sophisticated than Cheliax is usually capable of being, but does seem like something they might do for a specific individual they are trying to corrupt because she's running an important project for them.
Oh, yes, I'm very much clear on the fact that's what they were doing. I wanted them to do that to help me be a better Asmodean. Aspexia and Abigail and Subarax and Malol worked really hard on that for the last 4 months, and they shaped who I am today. And I'd try to undo that on the grounds that it was hostile interference in my personality and values, except that, one, I am confused about, given how muddled all humans are all the time, what it would even mean to deal fairly with them. Maybe Abadar just knows the answer to that one, but it wasn't obvious just from thinking about it. And two, I think maybe my being more and properly Asmodean was part of the plan.
The plan?
Keltham doesn't want to start emotionally relying on it, but I think Caden and Nethys and possibly some other gods are trying to steer this so the universe doesn't get destroyed. And I think my being someone who can replace Asmodeus is part of their plan.
And you are pretty confident it's a good plan and you want to help them pull it off?
I don't know what you're getting at.
Just that there's a failure mode where you decide Asmodeus shouldn't be able to order you around and go looking for someone worthier to throw yourself behind.
Is that a failure mode?
There are a lot of sacrifices that get made in emergencies, and that's one of them. But ideally, the person deciding who you should grow up into should be you.
I don't actually see how that serves Iomade.
Okay, one, why do you care if that serves Iomade? You don't work for her. And two, why would Iomade be worth serving if she didn't want us to grow up?
Because she is opposed to hell and doesn't want to destroy the world?
All right, that's fair. Serving Iomade is somewhat overdetermined for a lot of people. But still, I'm glad she's not just the absolute minimum lawful good god who technically is on the right side and more useful than Aristil or fucking Shizuru.
Oh, is Shizuru actually useless? That's not just Chelish propaganda?
Well, some people argue it should be parsed as damaged more than useless. But she hasn't done much of anything in Golarion since Tsukio died and Neomedes leading the war on the evil afterlives despite being brand new as a god and comparatively very weak.
Huh. I don't have any idea what kind of god I'd be if I ascended. If I had all the time in the world, I think I could figure something out. But Keltham wants to go ahead very, very soon. If I don't convince him to go with my plan instead.
It's a very hard problem we've set ourselves here.
And if Iomede has a solution in mind about who I'm supposed to be, I'd at least want to hear her out about it.
Iomede doesn't know we're here and would presumably shut this down if she did. Which I think would be an improvement, but it's not an improvement I have the power to make unilaterally. And presumably if things got to the point where Caden Kalian thought it'd be an improvement, he could tell her. If she were here, I imagine she'd ask, if you were in charge of hell, would it be a horrifying atrocity full of torture?
No! Torture is stupid. It'd be a place where people like me can get stronger and better. And if people don't get stronger and better through pain, then you should obviously do something else to them.
Well, I gotta say, I think most possible gods that turns into is a big improvement over the present situation.
Well, thank you for the vote of confidence. What is Iomede's stance on doing something really awful that harms and potentially damns lots of people in order to slightly increase the probability that this plan works and the world doesn't end? Is it just, well, how bad for how much probability of making things better?
Mostly it's that mortals shouldn't do that and should leave it to the gods. But if you have to do it, there's not some strategy that's better than figuring out how likely it is to work and how much harm it's going to do, and if there's any better way, and then doing your best.
She makes a face. That's kind of Dathilani.
They're probably also correct about the color of the sky, and plausibly about a lot of things, but it's hard to tell from here how much they had instincts that are actually somewhat appropriate to this situation because of knowledge of the broader multiverse they concealed from people like Keltham, or had no information at all about that, how much the things they taught about ideal reasoners are applicable to negotiating with gods.
I want to swear Despotter to secrecy and then ask him. He's not on our side, obviously, but as not a full god, he's easier to just talk with, and he'd know, and Ericura got divinity from Pharasma, and I bet knows lots more than anyone alive about what kinds of things are actually possible to ask Pharasma for.
That's not an awful idea.
Wow, thanks.
I don't know if it's a good idea. We're into very strange territory here. Generally, I would never talk to an archdevil for any reason.
I acknowledge that I have low standards and also that I was straightforwardly being manipulated by hostile entities who torture people for fun, but he treated me like I wasn't livestock, like my growing stronger was a potential shared interest of ours. He could exist in my hell, I think, without the torturing people for fun. I don't actually know if he tortures people for fun or just because it's the done thing. What he told me he'd do to me if I failed was hand me off to one of the counts of hell whose pride I'd wounded. Kind of fucked up how at this point that sounds like an unusually good eternal fate for me.
I really think we can do better than that.
I'm just terrified we'll do worse. Every time Keltham is terrifying or horrible, I feel. Like I deserve it. Because I hurt him worse and first, and like I don't deserve it. Because I never wanted to hurt him, and like I should forgive him because he's in pain, and like I'd never forgive myself for that reason. And why shouldn't I hold him to the same standard? And I hate him for not being good enough to do the thing he's trying to do, and trying to do it anyway. But I used to admire that about him. I remember admiring that about him. Sorry, I don't know what I'm asking.
Well, if the question is, did you hurt him? Yeah, you really, really did. And if the question is he handling it in the manner Iomede would handle it? No, he really, really isn't. I don't think he wants to. And if the question is any of that going to get better ever? Probably not. I've seen some serious interpersonal wounds heal, but not when events were basically guaranteed to keep salting them.
This is really, really stupid, but I kind of hoped he would react in some way when I explained about Elias Abarco.
That doesn't sound really, really stupid.
I think it's not that I mind that he had sex with me. I'm not 12. I was going to give him Tanya, except that Caden Kylian intervened, which, in hindsight, might not have just been Caden Kylian randomly doing shit if he was trying to protect the project girls so Keltham could be reasoned with. Though if that was what he was doing, you'd think Keltham could be reasoned with, and he isn't showing it. Wow, I sound like a terrible person even to myself when I talk about this. But anyway, the thing that was upsetting about it was that I'd promised Keltham I wouldn't, and it was, actually, weirdly upsetting. I think about it every time I see a Barco, and it's been like 3 months now, and I realize that's on me. And so it feels wrong or something for Keltham not to care. Like there's something there I thought was real that never was.
A Barco raped you?
Kind of. I mean, calling it that feels like I wasn't happy that no one felt sorry for me, so I just decided to pick a more dramatic word for it. He had permission from my superiors. It wasn't like he committed a crime or something.
You know, it's very normal to be upset if someone raped you, even if they had permission from your superiors.
I can't think of a single guy I slept with except Keltham who'd have taken it well if I told him no, and I've never had problems before.
What are you imagining Iomade thinks about this?
That I should grow up and stop feeling sorry for myself?
Wow. No. Okay, I think we should back up a little. The only solution I've ever run across to not wanting to be an actor in the world, to looking at this world and thinking it's too hard and confusing and scary, to wanting someone else to run it for you, to looking for some rule you can follow instead of doing your best, is to do the hard thing and stop looking for shortcuts. People try a lot of other stuff, never seen any of it work. That is not the correct solution to being traumatized in full generality.
Fine then, what is?
Well, generally you expect that if someone raped you, then you're going to be fucked up about that. Definitely if you have to keep working with them. Definitely if it's only been 3 months. And also you might reasonably wish your boyfriend was upset on your behalf when he found out, and feel gratified if other people are upset on your behalf when they find out, and feel like that's one of the hurts your relationship with Keltham did you, that you weren't able to tell him until much later, and he wasn't able to comfort you.
Because he was simultaneously learning that I betrayed him in every conceivable way.
When people hurt one another, they quite often both get hurt, you know. What you did to him was much, much worse than what he did to you. But it is not surprising at all that your relationship hurt you too, even that it hurt you very badly. And no matter who you were, no matter what you'd done, no one should have raped you.
Or Tanya.
Or Tanya. Or anyone. It seems possible to me that some of what Keltham is going through is harm related to his having been tricked into having sex under conditions he didn't agree to and didn't want, with people he wrongly trusted cared about what he'd agreed to and what he wanted.
I know. I didn't mean to do that. I wanted to be someone he could trust. I tried to keep his trust. That's why the stupid Abarco thing even bothered me. I would fix it for him if I could. I, in fact, am probably more attached to my tentative plan where I stab Abigail for him than makes any goddamn sense.
If I had a plan to stab Abigail Thrun that had a good chance of working, I'd be attached to it too.
When it's been 2 hours and she has a plan and a long list of questions and is done crying and feels like she's not going to have a panic attack, if Keltham gets frustrated and proposes statuing her again, she leaves her tent.
Outside her tent is a note. Weirdly, it looks like a printed page from a book, though with slightly uneven letters on the line, even though it was clearly written just for Carissa. The note says that the entity formerly known as Keltham had previously promised himself he would take a day off, possibly 2 days, once he got time dilation up. He has not actually had a day off since he left Cheliax, because time previous to establishment of time dilation was too valuable. You can keep going for quite a while with a +6 belt of mighty constitution. Mr. Doomlord thinks he may, in fact, actually need to take a day off now, right now, even though Carissa is here and has all sorts of important questions. The note continues to say that some of the others here can answer some of those questions. Carissa does in fact know the key elements of his basic Doom plan. Others in core will have more details if she asks. The critical path item on the Doom plan is 1. Wishcrafting the 3 explosions he needs, 1 Wax Rovagug 2x Absalom, which INT-27 is hopefully enough to start doing, and 2. Getting 3 wish scrolls with which to do it. That person does not expect Carissa to help with 2, but thinks 1 should plausibly count as harm reduction here. Carissa hopefully has lots she can get up to speed on productively? Or Carissa could take a day off inside time dilation. Keltham does not think he made the wrong decision about not taking time to recover immediately after he left Cheliax. There was too much that needed doing immediately. But it sure was what everybody in Osirian was telling him to do. Possibly the same advice may apply to Carissa. Well, not the part where they wanted him to spend a month in a monastery. That would have just been wrong. Keltham's successor entity does not know of anything that Carissa needs to do immediately the way he needed to do things immediately. So far as he knows, nothing terrible will happen if she takes an entire day off. Carissa's ex-boyfriend has no idea if she considers herself still bound by any promises she made him about that sort of thing. But if so, she's free to have sex with people here, as Carissa once told him a long time ago, was helpful for recovering from violence. She can also get a relaxing massage from the woman calling herself minor character, though she also answers to anything else you want to call her. This massage, on some viewpoints, would reasonably count as sex, hence the specification. He'd say more, but it's cheating to do anything with emotional implications while you're hiding in your time-dilated adventurer's tent. He's pretty sure that minor character is not Nocticula, he checked. She now answers to Noticula, too. He really needs to stop thinking now. Good night for a while.
Well, all right then. Carissa has zero interest in sex with anyone here. They're not as pretty as Abigail. She'll get some books from the library and read, if not the truth, at least the lies the rest of the world tells, and take notes for her argument with Keltham tomorrow, or the day after, as soon as he's ready. A couple hours into that, she will concede that possibly she in fact needed a day off too. Has she actually ruled out that minor character is Abigail? Most people are. After about 10 hours of reading books and eating chocolate, Carissa determines that she is not, as a person, temperamentally suited to taking days off when there might not be very many days left. She gives herself permanent dancing lights just so she can have more than the maximum number of dancing lights, and puts a permanent alarm on her bag of holding just for practice with permanency and a permanent invisibility alarm on her headband, because why not? Then she copies a bunch of fifth circle spells off Keltham's scroll library, and also any staff who'll let her. Carmen has overland flight, which means Carissa will be practically able to swoop around, never touching the ground again, though objectively, this is not a good use of a fifth circle spell slot or something. She's not going to work on wish wordings until she's talked with Keltham. If any of her ideas are good ideas, they'll have several additional months to work on wish wordings, and any work done before she wishes herself up as smart as a person can be will be wasted. Maybe she can just figure out how to make a 664 and then she and Keltham won't have to fight over it.
He finishes more or less blacking out in his bedroll, just being tired. He finishes being curled up in a ball, internally screaming, and feeling emotions that he thinks he can now survive feeling at Splendor 25, which isn't actually all of the emotions. He does not leave his tent in time dilation. Instead, he starts trying to think. This thinking process uses his incredibly fake computer, technically an unusually complicated permanent reactive illusion hooked up to a baseline language version of the keyboard his typewriter uses. It is literally just a text editor, but it allows for nested outlining and to edit things already written. His aligned item creator has not figured out any equivalent of print this screen. If he wants to save or share anything from the incredibly fake computer, his aligned task monkey has to manually translate it to Taldane and enter it into the typewriter. The real person running this entire show is not somebody who can think in real time, especially at only +3 intelligence. He thinks slowly, and using a fake computer for external memory anchoring, processing lists of possibilities too large and arguments too intricate to be held in memory all at once. To be clear, the simple aspect of making lists or writing down complicated arguments is not the key thing and would not have gotten previous Keltham all that far. The key point is more like thought processes that successfully scale to considering more possibilities, because it's not always the case that everything after possibility number 3 on your list never happens, and what does happen usually isn't on the list anyways. Or arguments whose local steps hold together well enough that their productivity scales intact to larger argument structures, rather than arguments too complicated to hold in your head just never working. Nobody tries to design an entire liquid-phase nuclear reactor in their heads, even before their society invents outline editors. But then, you can have nice things like nuclear reactors only because your society has designed some method of thinking about such engineering problems, which is precise enough that it scales to a nuclear reactor design and actually goes on working. If all of your society's political arguments fit into a paragraph, it doesn't necessarily mean you've discovered a kind of thinking about politics that scales well to longer than a paragraph, or that people with longer arguments have better arguments. But still, that's the kind of politics you'll get.
Carissa's just writing pages and pages of notes whenever something comes to mind while she's item crafting. Thoughts related to alternatives to releasing Rovagug, thoughts related to alternatives to bargaining with Pharasma, thoughts related to a Kaikek, thoughts related to the plausible state of information of various gods, thoughts related to entities to contact, thoughts related to making it unnecessary to avoid Sheliax, thoughts related to influencing Asmodeus's perspective on how well the Alani project is going, thoughts related to what Kaiden and Nethys are angling for, thoughts related to her cult and how to encourage it if that seems useful, thoughts related to world conquest if they end up going down one of the unlikely-looking branches where that seems like a good idea, thoughts related to assassinating Abigail in a way that doesn't discredit Carissa with the Church of Asmodeus, thoughts related to whether they're in a story, and whether there are any worlds in the overlap of in a story, and should not just act like everyone and everything matters exactly as much as you'd expect. Hey, this might be a slightly absurd question, but do you think Osirian would agree to let Cheliax conquer them if we swore to them it was for complicated reasons in their long-term interests?
Is it in their long-term interests? It seems about as not in their long-term interests as a thing could reasonably be.
Under some sets of assumptions, one of the things Kaiden and Nethys have been trying to influence is how much Asmodeus cares about Galarian, the planet, either so that he won't release Rovagug even if he loses, or so that if Keltham releases Rovagug, Asmodeus will commit the resources to stop him before the planet is eaten. If even Asmodeus is strong enough to do that, which I consider unlikely, but not so unlikely this isn't worth thinking about.
Most of the gods that saved Galarian the first time are still around, right?
Also unsure, but I think no. A lot of the gods that were around then died. I bothered a couple of the historians for estimates of how many, and they were like between 3 and 20. We have more than 3, but fewer than 20 new gods, but new gods are also much weaker than ancient ones. On the other hand, some of the ancient gods fought on the side of Rovagug, and maybe no one will do that this time. Or maybe Asmodeus will, in which case I think we're completely fucked.
Keltham's much more optimistic than you about that. I don't know his reasoning.
Do you trust his reasoning?
He reminds me a lot of myself when I was younger, really. I would absolutely have murdered trillions of people to spite Pharasma. Luckily, I didn't have the opportunity.
Okay, not that I haven't myself been a bad person in the past, but I actually have trouble imagining what it's like to be the kind of person who'd murder trillions of people to spite Pharasma. You don't even get to stick around enjoying having spited Pharasma. You're dead.
If it's not intuitively obvious, I don't know how to explain it. She thinks she owns us. She doesn't own us. We own us. Fuck her. We'll do this without her.
That just seems like going, gravity thinks it's in charge here, but it doesn't own me. I own me. I'll jump off a cliff and show gravity who is in charge.
Yes, obviously you do pick up a fly first if you can.
But if you haven't picked up a fly first, you don't do it. And at least then you're only risking yourself. This is more like throwing a bunch of innocent people off the cliff to show how much you won't let gravity spite you.
Well, I agree today I wouldn't do it. But when I was Keltham's age, absolutely. If Pharasma doesn't like it, she should have been a better god.
What changed your mind?
That is a question I've given a lot of thought without a satisfying answer. Some of it is just witnessing enough horrors to realize on some important level that bad things are actually bad, even if my logic for doing them is impeccable. I do not think that'll work on Keltham, since most of the horrors he's witnessed are hell. And fixing hell is in fact a pretty reasonable thing to go on an insane crusade about. And some of it is my wife and children, and more recently my father being in Axis and substantially more whole and wise and happy. And, I have the impression that well is somewhat poisoned for Keltham. To be clear, I am also optimistic that we are jumping off this cliff with a fly spell up.
He's going to destroy the world. Even in what he considers a good scenario, Rovagug's going to probably eat everyone in the world.
So, we're not destroying the world there, right? The problem is that Asmodeus can't stand losing and so will destroy everything rather than suffer a hit to his pride, and we can't just let ourselves all be hostages to Asmodeus. We should say to him, fuck you, go ahead and try.
But then we'll die!
Well, you can't just do whatever people want you to do because otherwise they'll kill you.
Not only can you do that, very nearly everyone who isn't Osirian royalty is doing it constantly. Okay, setting that aside, today you wouldn't do it, right? Why not?
You know how it used to be that demons would eat souls out of the river of souls?
Yes. Asmodeus put a stop to that. Did he actually even do that? It was one of my favorite facts about him.
All the gods agreed to put a stop to that. But anyway, outside a place like this, if you ask people how they feel about that, they're all appalled. If you ask them if they wish we'd let the demons go back to doing that, they're terrified. They don't want that at all. Now, Keltham would point out, once people go to hell, they often want to die. But I guess I figure, if pretty much no one wants the River of Souls fed to Abaddon, then even if some of them after they go to hell do want that, they don't get to have the other people not in hell murdered on their behalf. I'd feel differently about that if there were a sizable contingent of people who did wish all souls got eaten when you die. And there's not none. Some Rovagog cultists showed up to join Keltham. They're mostly like that. But it's a really unusual stance. Much rarer than going to hell is.
I'm not sure that really touches very many of my intuitions about this.
Well, an intuition of mine is that it's very different to destroy a lottery people wouldn't have agreed to participate in on behalf of the losers than to destroy a lottery people did agree to participate in on behalf of the losers. And while I'm very much enthusiastic about cancelling the whole stupid lottery, I bet we can come up with a smarter way to do it in time.
If you have ideas for a specific smarter way...
I'd have to be a lot smarter than I am, but I was thinking about making something that does what Pharasma does. Shield us from the interference of the other outer gods. If civilization had that, then we really could tell her to go die in a fire, and I'll be the first to do it.
Well, let me know if that gets to the point where it needs spellcraft.
Will do. Now, you had some kind of crazy plan that involved invading Osirian?
Yeah, I need to check several of my assumptions with Keltham and convince him in some way that doesn't rely on reasoning about what Nethys and Caden are up to, but, I think Asmodeus might be powerful enough to save Galarian, if he wanted to, and if his triumphant forces are in the middle of conquering it and also making huge corrigibility discoveries, then, well, he'll want to. Is the broad outline. I realize this involves, everyone you love dying horribly, but so does unleashing Rovagog, and this way could conceivably be temporary.
Seems like a plan that fails in a spectacularly ugly way, if it fails. Say if Otelmens notices and crushes this project after that, but before Keltham can attempt ascending.
Yeah. If I were in charge of Cheliax?
Is that a realistic possibility?
Probably not. I'm exploring a lot of ideas that probably won't work. But I mean, assassinating Abigail probably would work, and she did tell me I was her obvious successor. She was displeased about it.
I'm surprised she didn't kill you on the spot.
I think she likes me.
You have fascinating romantic taste.
Don't want to talk about that, actually. Thank you, though. This was helpful. Why are you here if you don't want Keltham to succeed?
Well, I think if he surrounds himself entirely with Rovagog cultists, things will go even worse.
The person who eventually emerges from his tent does not look especially well rested. A lot of people inside Project Doom's Doom base would probably be glad to see him looking like that instead of distant, for what it's worth. Not his choice of name, but this isn't Cheliax, and it's not his nature to force people to use names they don't like.
Carissa is both looking forward to and dreading having their conversations about this again, but this time with emotional maturity. She's made as much progress on the newest headband as she reasonably can today. At some point, you just start making stupid, inattentive mistakes, and if you aren't being tortured by a devil, it's not worth pushing through them, and is now seeing if she can permanency the spell Gust of Wind in a way that makes her fancy new cloak of resistance flutter cinematically behind her, no matter what she's doing. The book says you need to be Sixth Circle, but there's no way to tell how hard a requirement that is without trying. She glances up at Keltham and then looks back at her notes.
Interruptible else interruptibility ETA, he says in baseline.
Interruptible, yeah.
Wishes are very different cognitive enhancers from headbands and spells. I'd expected any difference from their stacking separately, still surprised at how different they are. I think in retrospect that possibly Dathilani are built along slightly different lines, and the headbands just don't work on us exactly the same way as Galarian natives. Headband Splendor was not giving me much more persuasiveness, just stronger emotions, and I think the stronger emotions were coming in at a significant discount to what would happen with a Golarian native wearing the same headband. But now I feel like I could see maps of how this conversation could be more or less pleasant, persuasive, for you. I can also clearly see in retrospect that I should have gotten one attribute wished up first, and then paused to analyze the effects. But I'd have picked wisdom as the first attribute to wish up, because it's the cognitive self-analysis one, so I'm somewhat glad I didn't actually do that.
After extensive complaining to Carmen about how it was deeply unreasonable to expect emotional sensitivity from Keltham, but she could really use it, Carissa came up with a strategy.
Carissa's imaginary Keltham, not a recommended strategy for coping with breakups, Lynn Tamand. Translation: I was being a dick earlier, and while I'm not quite willing to apologize for it, I'm planning to do better this time. I wasn't being rude because I wanted to see you suffer, which is how it might have come across.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059